Chase, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
So, can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I did 20 years in the U.S. military. I retired about 5 years ago, and I retired as a chief in the Navy. And somehow wrote a couple of books that hit the #1 bestseller list in behavior profiling, persuasion, and influence and stuff like that. And now I train everyday people in these kinds of skills, and I also just continue to train intelligence operatives and intelligence agencies in the same skills.
That sounds really fascinating. Was that some educational plan to end up there, or were there some interesting twists and turns that got you there?
There was no plan to get there. When I was 19 years old, I was stationed in Pearl Harbor, and a young lady at a bar like shut me down pretty hard. And I kind of went home that night and typed "how to tell when girls like you" into the internet, and that was kind of my interest. Was just like, I don't want to be rejected again. Like, how can I see rejection before it starts? And I got really into body language and reading people. And I think the more I could see that everybody was kind of screwed up, it made me less self-conscious, and it made me a little more confident. It gave me confidence. And a few years after this, I'm getting into all this training and stuff. My best friend, Craig Wibberley, is killed in a terrorist attack on the USS Cole.
Oh, wow. I remember
And
that.
all of these failures were attributed to these intelligence operatives couldn't get the data they needed. They couldn't develop relationships with local assets. So I said, I'm going to use these skills. I'm going to keep going hard on these skills so I can develop these training programs for intelligence agencies so that we don't have that happen again. And that's kind of a long story short of it. And I continue to be obsessed by this stuff. Like, the novelty still hasn't worn off for
Hmm.
me. I love it still. I went to Harvard University for neuroscience and neuroendocrinology. I'm again enrolled at Duke University right now for medical neuroscience. And it's just, there's an endless supply of information. Like, I think the more you know about this stuff, the more you realize how much you don't know, you know?
Yeah, particularly when it comes to the human brain, I think we probably haven't even scratched the scratch on the surface yet.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's the most complex thing in the world that we know of. And it's the only thing in the known universe that named itself
I
and
didn't know
studies
that.
itself.
Oh, okay,
So,
yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah.
So was there more of an interest on the reading behavior or manipulating behavior?
It was reading to begin with. And then I thought, these operatives are going to need some kind of enhanced training. How do I build rapport rapidly? What are like this? I wanted to figure out formulas for what makes people tick, which is reading them.
Hmm.
And how do I use that data from that behavior profile to use like surgically sharpened persuasion techniques or influence techniques on that person?
So let's talk about that. What are some of those? How do people tick, and how to read what a person is thinking or feeling? I guess you can't really read their mind, but
Right.
reading their physical characteristics, which might reveal things.
Yeah. So I'll give you a few that are just about universal. So one thing I teach people to look for is undercover stress signals or hidden stress signals. And one of the biggest of all time that you can spot today is if you're talking to a person and you then the topic changes and you then all of a sudden see them start blinking more often.
Hmm.
And this is something we refer to as blink rate. If they start blinking more often, this is indicative of stress, and the person's probably trying to hide a certain degree of stress. And it's most likely about the topic that just got brought up in the conversation. So, whether you're in negotiation or parenting or sales or whatever it is, you're seeing something that needs to be dug into. Like, I need to either A, skip over this topic and like
Yeah.
talk about something else, or B, there's a point I need to ask a couple more questions about here. And if you're good at persuasion and you are able to calm people down and really establish a person's focus, you'll see the blink rate start to drop over time. So a lessening blink rate, somebody blinking less often, is our response, our body's natural response to being calm and focused. So focus lowers our blink rate, stress increases our blink rate. And one other thing is when a person squeezes their lips together, we call this lip compression.
I've heard of this.
And we typically, yeah, we typically say that this suggests or denotes that somebody's withholding opinions or withholding some kind of information. So, like you ask somebody, "Oh, how do you like your new job?" And they go, "Oh, it's great."
Yeah.
And they squeeze their lips together. Something's being held back there. And that's when like if you're in sales and you ask somebody, "Well, would you say your credit score is pretty good?" And they go, "Oh yeah, our credit's great." So now you might have an issue. And or if you ask a person a question and you see that withholding, that later on, maybe not immediately, but later on, you might need to ask a few questions that no other person would have asked because they didn't see those little behaviors. So I think it's amazing when you can see a world that's right in front of everybody, but nobody else can see this like hidden world where it's almost like our private thoughts are just public at a certain point.
So, how long did it take for you to go from knowing these things and consciously looking for them till they became second nature? And I assume you don't even think about this process anymore. You just know, hey, they're stressed, they're uncomfortable, and you don't even. I assume you don't even think about the signals anymore.
Not much. And it's funny, like we have a YouTube channel called the Behavior Panel, where it's me and three other profilers, and we break down behavior a lot. So nowadays, I have to bring it into conscious awareness so we can talk about it on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I would say it takes about so just learning blink rate. Let's take that for an example. We don't want to try to learn 5 or 6 different behaviors at the same time. You just want to get one under your belt and just get it under your belt until you find yourself just, oh, wow, I just noticed that without really trying to pay attention to it. Then start incorporating another one. So it's just kind of like learning to drive a car, except you're not learning to drive a stick shift. You want to
Yeah.
minimize all of the stuff you're trying to pay attention to at one time.
And then the other question about that, psychopaths and sociopaths, do they do the same thing? Because if they truly believe what they're saying, regardless of whether it's true or not, does that change the behavior?
It does to an extent. So, funnily enough, there've been a lot of research on this, and psychopaths and normal people score about the same exact score on a polygraph.
Oh,
So
interesting.
the stress responses are still there. The little facial tics that reveal what's going on underneath still really come up. Just using words alone. So if you were reading a paragraph written by a psychopath, they would be more likely to be successful in deceiving people with just syntax. So when it comes to just behaviors and like putting somebody on a polygraph, exactly about the same. But with the facial expressions and stuff, Robert Hare, he's the guy who did like this, all the research on psychopaths, Hare. And he even developed the current, as we know it today, psychopath checklist, you could call it. He has this great story that he tells, and he says, imagine you leave your apartment, you're gonna go get some Chinese food, and as you're leaving your apartment, you pass by this big accident scene. There's a car crash going on. There's a mom holding a wounded child that's maybe alive, maybe dead. It's just a gruesome scene, and the first thought in your head is, I think I'm going to have orange chicken tonight. Orange
Mm.
chicken. Then you pick up your food, and then you get back to your apartment. And an hour after you eat dinner, you find yourself looking in front of the mirror, just like practicing all the sad and shocked faces that you saw in the crowd, trying to memorize how those people reacted to something. And this is not because they're trying to deceive. This is because they think other people had to practice it too.
Oh.
And all they're really trying to do, they're not trying to manipulate the world. They're trying to get along with society. They're trying to learn how to connect with other people most of the time.
Hmm.
So I think they get a bad rap, and that like just the word psychopath means a person's going to be some killer or something,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
not true at all.
It's yeah, okay. No, that makes perfect sense. They're just trying to, well, this is what I see when other people experience something, I need to make sure that I'm doing the same thing when I see people when I
Yeah.
see that same situation. Oh,
So
interesting.
true. Yeah.
So, are there any other specific signals as far as reading people? I know that you mentioned the blink rate, the lip compression. I thought you said there was a third one. Did I miss it?
Sure. We'll throw it out right now. One thing that is really important and almost universal, and this is a video podcast here, so people are going to be watching this, and I'm going to experiment with Chris here, so just so you can see it. So, Chris, what is across the street from the nearest Burger King closest to your house?
An empty field.
Okay. And what is to the right of that?
Car wash.
Okay. What is the fifth word of the Pledge of Allegiance?
Oh gosh.
There we go. So
Yeah,
now we got it.
yeah.
So the first thing you did was look up and to your right, which is kind of accessing some kind of memory. There's things out there that say, oh, this one's creative and one's logical. Not necessarily true at all. So what I want to do is establish where you look and where your eyes move to recall data early
Hmm.
on in a conversation. So if I'm doing a job interview, if I'm talking, let's say I'm interviewing a babysitter to see if I want them to spend time with my kids, I want to look where your eyes move normally,
Hmm.
then ask you a similar question later and see if your eyes move in a different direction when I'm asking you to recall a piece of data. That's a good data point. And I wouldn't say you're instantaneously, oh, the person's lying, because they do that on TV all the time. But I do see this is something I need to dig into. If I see the eyes moving in a different direction than what we're really used to seeing this person do.
Hmm.
So if you're in a conversation with somebody and they look down and to their left and down and to their left, down to their left all the time, and then all of a sudden you go, yeah, and you don't have any criminal convictions or anything like that, and they look right and straight off to their ear like this, that's a big deal. And that's a spot where you might need to ask a few more questions.
So it's not the specific direction they're looking about, but the inconsistency of the direction.
Correct. Yeah. So you establish like what's their home? Where do they go to access information most of the time? And then I'm seeing a deviation from that. So a lot of people give you checklists for body language, but I always say that detecting change is more important than checklist.
I've definitely heard that before. So, out of curiosity, on the first two questions, was I just looking straight at you?
Yes, because your visual and spatial memory is probably excellent and you had all of that kind of mapped out.
And I was trying really hard to not give you an indicator for those two. And then you asked me something that I actually had to think about
Right. I was
and start counting.
just gonna ramp up the cognitive load there.
You ramped it up well beyond my ability to even answer the question. I don't think I actually got the question out.
I don't think you did, but I don't know. Greg Hartley, a friend of mine, asked me the same question to demonstrate it, and it's just a perfect way to show somebody's natural eye movement for retrieving some kind of information that's in a box somewhere.
Yeah, because it was like, okay, well, the pledge of allegiance, I pledge allegiance,
Yeah,
and then I got to start pulling out fingers and start counting the words.
yeah,
That's interesting that you're able to. I don't want to say force a reaction, but to uh, apply enough pressure to get a reaction.
yeah. Well, I mean, you increase the load. How far down the stairs do I need you to go to get information?
So when you're doing that, would you normally slowly increase the load? Obviously, for the demonstration purposes, you went from a low number to a fairly high load, at least for me. Is it the normal sort of thing in a conversation? If you're trying to do this, you would slowly increase the load as to maybe not make it as noticeable what you were doing?
Yeah, and let's say, like you said, you used to work at a company or something, and I say, "Oh yeah, I've driven by that building a few times. They've got a I was stuck in this parking structure. I can't remember how many levels are on that parking garage there." And you'd be like, I think there's five. And I would just get that little eye movement there. So it's just anything that causes a person to dig in and actually have to recall a visual memory or something that, is not, they don't have to regurgitate often.
Hmm. So do you start applying this to people inadvertently in normal conversations and social settings?
Oh yeah. And I even do it with my kids. So we'll like be in the back of an Uber or something traveling, and I'll have my son look in the rearview mirror, and I'll lean over to my son and I'll say, "All right, he's going to look down and to his left. You ready?" So we'll do those little experiments all the time. I've tried to teach my kids this stuff since they were probably like 5 and 6. They started learning, and they're 15 and 16 now.
Are they really good at it now?
They're very good, and they've become unconsciously good at it because
Yeah,
they
so
never knew that they were learning until kind of recently.
it was this is just the type of conversation that every dad has with their kids, and
Right.
common sense that everybody just picks up.
That's right. It's just normal for them.
So have you found people that are kind of in the same field who they did not figure this out? They kind of figured this out on their own through life experience and they don't even know how they do it, versus people like you who've come along and I've studied, I've done research, and I've found methodology that works. Are there people that have, in a sense, discovered the methodology on their own unintentionally?
I think there's a lot of people out there that do it intuitively. And statistically speaking, women are way better at it than us. Like women are naturally good at it. The problem comes like if I have a person here that's naturally good at reading behavior, and I say, okay, what happened in that conversation? They're going to say is something doesn't feel right, or
Hmm.
it feels like he's not telling the truth. And the moment I ask why, they may not know because they're unconsciously good at it and they're not really processing data. They're just processing feelings
Hmm.
based on the data that they're seeing.
It's the infamous they trust their gut.
Yes, indeed. And they've got a good gut. Some people don't have a very good one, but they've definitely got a good one.
So how hard is it to for people to mask these types of reactions?
It's we lie best with our face. We learn to lie first at a very young age with our faces. We smile when we're not happy, so we
Hmm.
can make other people happy. You can cover some, but there's two things that need to be escalated for all of these behaviors to start coming out. The first thing is cognitive load. Cognitive load is just how much data am I getting this person to process? How many
Hmm.
apps can I open in that person's head and leave them running in the background? And the second thing is the stakes. How high are the stakes? So in a normal, let's say I'm doing an interview, I might ask a question of, well, what time do you usually leave the office? That the stakes aren't really high, but let's say, Chris, I came down here today because I like you and I think you're a good person. And because of that, I want you to think extremely, very carefully before you answer this question. And I want you to take all the time you need to process it. This is very important. What time do you normally leave that office? Uh, so, same question,
Yeah.
but I've just kind of ramped up those stakes a little bit higher. I've
Hmm.
made it more important. So, I increased the likelihood that some of those nonverbal indicators are going to be there.
And the more experienced the person is in some of these things, maybe the more cognitive load they can handle without giving away indicators.
Yeah, there's a lot of times where people don't give much indicators at all. And the indicators that they do give are verbal. So then we get into like, how can I analyze that statement? So, guilty people, for instance, just for one example, will give you tons of details about irrelevant, superfluous crap. Like they'll describe the stitching in a seat inside the car and how the steering wheel was leather and the speedometer, what it looked like. And then when they reference a mugging or a murder or something, then they'll say, and then the thing happened. And then they'll go back. So then we have like what I call a detail mountain and a detail valley,
Hmm.
and the detail valley being kind of right where the critical thing is that I'm asking about is a big deal. So there's 100 little verbal techniques that we're also looking for, especially for deception.
And I've also heard, and I don't know if it's true or not, that they'll be like minimizing language.
Yeah,
Like, well, I don't think not very much, or kind of,
yeah,
sort of vague words that are in specific amounts
yeah,
associated with, like, if you, what should happen with this person? Well, all right,
right.
yeah, I kind of have some debt. Well, how
Yeah,
much is
the
some?
punishment question. That's such a great question. What should happen to the person that did this? Then you'll also hear severity softening. So instead of kill, they'll say hurt. Instead of steal, they might use the word take or borrow. Instead of an assault, they might
Hmm.
use the term mess with or fought with. So they'll soften the severity of the act when a normal person, especially when it comes to like sexual offenses and things like that, might even use the word interfere with instead
Hmm.
of the bad word that we don't want to get kicked off YouTube for saying.
Yeah.
But they'll soften that severity when any reasonable normal person would typically just be totally comfortable using the word kill or steal or any of that. So that's one of the big ones too. We'll see that, and we call that severity softening.
Is there an opposite of that where someone is going to heighten the severity of maybe something that's not part of the conversation or not part of the story in order to try to, push the attention there, kind of like in the hyper detail and stuff that's not relevant?
Yeah, so the increasing severity on other things, like how dramatic a lot of other things were. We just did a video analysis of somebody. I wish I could remember who it was, but yeah, so you'll see a detail mountain in the place where there should be a detail mountain here. For an
Hmm.
average person, you experience an emotional event, you witness a mugging, or somebody's accusing you of mugging somebody. That's where the detail mountain should be. That's where all of your attention, your facial expressions will get more animated, and it'll be the opposite for people who are guilty.
Hmm. Oh, that's crazy. So how can we apply some of these toward these techniques towards not being scammed? Is there
Oh,
kind of like a process that happens when people are trying to scam us? And can we use some of these techniques either linguistically or visually? Obviously, if you're on the phone with someone or it's email, you can't use visual cues.
right.
But what are some of the how are scammers using these things and how can we catch it?
So I would say first, as a quick warning to everybody, if you're in a conversation where it just feels magical and psychopaths and manipulators aren't showing you a great person, they're showing you yourself.
Hmm.
And that's typically why we fall so hard for these people, these con artists, kind of cult leader personalities. They show you yourself. And the way to tell whether or not it's toxic, because sometimes you feel good when you meet a genuine person. If you leave that conversation and the feeling starts drifting off, then that was created by dopamine. That means that person's spiking up your dopamine for that exact reason. But meeting a genuine person, having a social connection, we get a little bit of serotonin, we get a good sized boost of oxytocin, and that's kind of the connection chemical. So the feeling good afterwards, after that conversation, will last a lot longer.
Hmm.
So when it comes to manipulating people in general over email or anything, I teach influence and persuasion for a living. And when some people call some of my techniques dangerous, the danger is in the person using it,
Yeah.
not the person having the techniques. It's like having a scalpel in your hand.
Yeah.
If you're a surgeon, that's probably a good thing.
Or a brick.
Yeah,
You can build a house or you can
right.
whack somebody with it.
So true. So uh, uh, when it comes to social engineering and when it comes to all influence, whether you're a therapist influencing a patient or a person like phishing, doing all of these scams online and stuff, which I'm not very well educated on, it follows a 3-layer formula. And I call this the PCP framework. So the first P, and these happen in order specifically, and you can go back in your life, if you're watching this with Chris and I, every infomercial you've ever fell for, like I bought a slap chop one time from an infomercial, and I saw that it worked in this model. If you confess to a crime in an interrogation room, it follows this model every time. So P is perception. So something happens to change your perception of what's going on. So I'm starting, what I mean by this is some event happens or a subject line in an email changes my perception of like, I thought this was what's going to happen, but now it's actually this. So the instant perception changes, it opens a window to move to step 2, which is context. Context is key. And In like right now, we're both on a Zoom call talking to each other. It's absolutely inappropriate for one of us to strip down and get naked,
Yeah.
but it's 100%. We're both going to do it today, but we're just going to do it when we're standing in front of the shower, about to step into the shower. So
Yeah.
context gives us permission to behave in unusual ways, right? So if I can shift the context, I can get a person to do just about anything, because that allows them, that becomes a socially allowable behavior. So something, let's say an email subject line changes my perception. I start reading the email and I'm saying, this is not what I thought it was. And now I'm seeing myself, oh, this is a different situation. I have a different set of rules for what's allowed in this, or what's expected of people in a certain situation. And finally, the context, the moment that shifts, it opens a window to door number 3, which is permission. So the moment we have this new situation of context, and the person that's talking to us or the person that's emailing us seems like credible, they seem like maybe an authority, or they seem like they have a tremendous amount of confidence, they're giving us that permission at the very end. And in the case of an email, we're feeling that sense of permission because the context shifted. And now, can I click links? Well, in this context, it looks like it's from my bank. So now the context allows me to click the link, and the trueness of everything finally gives me the permission to act in a way that I normally wouldn't.
Oh, that's sinister. It's interesting that that's a very specific order.
Yeah.
Not just three things that happen in near proximity in time, but there's a specific order to it.
Yeah, I think it's a cascade for sure.
Oh, do you know if there's any psychology behind why that particular order works?
I think it would go into this system that I designed, because we understand the PCP model. The second thing that I teach is how to influence the mammalian brain. So this wouldn't just be psychology. I would say there's also some physiology, some neurology involved here too, because we're talking about brainstem and the mammalian part of our brain. There are 4 things that kept our ancestors alive, and since it kept us our ancestors alive so well, they passed it down to us, and passed it down and passed it down. This is why a 3-year-old kid is afraid of a snake, even though they don't have the training, or a giant spider is scary to a 1-year-old baby. So we get these things passed down to us from our ancestors. So there's 4 things that, and these aren't in order necessarily, but I call this the fate model. FATE spells fate, because it is our fate. The first one is focus. And if you think of shifting perception, which is first, anything novelty creates human focus. It manufactures focus in human beings. So if you think of an ancestor walking past this bush, the same bush every day, her whole life, when she's walking with a sack of berries back to the village, and all of a sudden, one time, a stick snaps behind that bush while she's walking past it, 100% of her focus is on what is that noise.
Yeah.
Something new and unexpected happened. So it changed her perception of what's going on. So we respond to focus. The second thing that kept our ancestors alive is responsiveness to the A, which is authority. So not obeying an authority figure, or even a perceived authority figure, means we can get kicked out of the tribe, we can get our head chopped off, we can get our babies killed, which means we don't reproduce, right? Number 3 would be tribe. Like, am I paying attention to what's going on around me? Am I doing the same thing that all of my tribe's people are doing? If everybody else is stacking a bunch of rings around their neck, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Otherwise, I'm outcast. And if I'm an outcast, I probably won't have intercourse with anybody, and I'm not going to have babies.
Is that kind of like conformity to community standards, so to speak?
Yes.
Okay.
So like tribal conformity. So like conformity is extremely high in certain aspects that pride themselves on not being nonconformist. You look at a giant group of Harley Davidson bikers, it's extremely high. It's the same level of conformity as the dudes hanging out at the country club driving range. It's the same level of conformity, just in different ways.
Yeah.
So tribal conformity is super important. And the E on the fate model is emotion. So anything that we grow up in our lives experiencing emotion about, even touching a hot stove, our brain says that was an emotional event. or I had some kind of pain or emotion there, I'm going to memorize what do I do and what do I not do. And if I can get you to focus, I can get you to think that I am a perceived authority figure. I can get you to think that other people are making the same decision that you are making. And I'm triggering your emotion. So scripts from your own life and saying, like, you've got emails before. Let's go back to the phishing
Yeah.
thing. You've got emails before. They've looked like this. You clicked on the link and it was absolutely fine. So that's an emotional script in your head.
Hmm.
I've already just following that little fate model also follows the PCP model. So I changed your perception, context, and permission because of all of that. And permission mostly comes from authority.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I've noticed from taking those caller ID blocked calls and taking those calls from numbers I don't know. Is there's always some level of authority that the person is trying to leverage in the conversation.
So true.
I'm calling on behalf of this entity, these people, or I'm a barrister for the state of California. We don't have barristers here, but
Yeah.
the linguistics are a little bit off, so it's a good giveaway. But yeah, so it's definitely I see that in scams of people trying to. The authority one seems to be a fairly big one that people try to take advantage of.
Yeah. Especially when they just throw in tiny words like we are calling because
Oh,
now your subconscious think, oh, now there's a group calling me. And just that tiny word shifted your perception, which is the first part of the PCP, or your perception was shifted with one word.
does the we also using the phrase we instead of I? Does that also kind of pull in kind of combine authority and tribe?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, this is scary. To me, this is just really interesting on how our brain can be so easily hijacked.
Yeah.
So, are there things that we could do that we can minimize kind of the brain hijacking going on?
Yes. I'd say there's probably no vaccination,
Yeah.
but the more that we learn about this, the more, if you just those two models, I have another model because we talked about what influences the mammal, and
Hmm.
then I have another one that is how we influence humans, specifically the prefrontal cortex. But if you take these models and just start identifying them in everyday life, when you're standing at a cash register, looking how everything is placed, how are they modifying my perception right now? How are they modifying the context to make me buy something? How am I being given permission by something, even if it's an inanimate object, to take a different action than I normally would? It starts to become glaringly apparent. And we start seeing, how is my focus being hijacked? If you have a smartphone, then you can figure that out in
Yeah.
5 seconds. Social media and all this. Where's the authority come from? And most people don't ever consciously process this. What am I very secret, maybe even outside my awareness, seeing as an authority figure in my life? And then, like tribe, what does social media do? They follow that model.
Yeah.
So they show you a tribe of people who agree with you to make you feel good, to increase your levels of dopamine, which gives you emotion, which is the end of the fate model, which makes you come back over and over.
So basically, everybody in our life, everywhere we go, everybody's using these techniques on us.
Even if they don't know they're using
Yeah,
them.
I was about to say even if it's not intentional.
Yeah. I mean,
So
if you think of good parenting, that's also a recipe for how to be a great parent. How
yeah,
do I change my kid focus? How do I become the authority? How do I monitor what tribe they're in? How do I give them good emotions? And how do I make my kid more confident doing all of those things?
yeah. So it keeps coming back to these are tools. It's just a matter of what is the end goal of these tools,
Right.
whether they're for helping us to be better people or to try to separate us from our money or take advantage of us. The same tools are going to be used one way or the other.
It's true. And I think it'll be a lot like any other thing, where most people don't misuse it. Most people use it for good, and that tends to outweigh everything.
Uh, Because you have a wide background here and a job set. Are these pretty consistent culture from culture to culture? Now, there might be a different authority or what might work as a source of authority here in the United States wouldn't be an appropriate authority for someone somewhere else in the world, or they might not perceive it as an authority. But are all these things pretty much consistent even in different cultures?
100%. Yes.
So
And
it's
one thing, when
so
I'm teaching clients to like have more authority, uh, I the first thing I tell them is if you were teleported back in time 2,000, 5,000 years where nobody spoke your language, would people still listen to you? Would
mm,
people still follow your behavior? So like that's part of what authority is having the behavior that's slow enough, in control enough, you're living in full composure. And composure, I think, is the cornerstone of what truly means authority and what tells other people's brains, I am talking to an authority figure right here. Composure.
is also uh, violence a kind of a commander of authority of like, if you don't do what I am trying to get you to do, I'm going to hurt you. So is that also one of those other kind of authority positions? We don't respect, like, we're not going to respect someone who's going around and assaulting people, but we realize that there's a consequence if we don't fall in line.
Right. And I would say that's not necessarily authority. That's triggering the emotional response of
Okay.
people through fear. I'd say like if you really want to see like the perfect example of what authority means is like Andy Griffith. Is like cool under pressure,
Yeah.
doesn't feel the need to carry a gun. And like if you just watch Andy Griffith and like soak that up for like a day, it'll like I think it levels people up.
Yeah. I admit I have watched many of an Andy Griffith show.
Me too.
And yeah, he always does have sense authority, and he's not going around beating people over the head with it.
Right. And typically, the biggest mistake I see people make is when I talk about confidence and when I talk about authority, their brain, without them doing it, but the human brain will kind of just default to seeing that in terms of hierarchy and status,
Hmm.
which is the biggest mistake. You can have tons of authority and you're the lowest guy on the totem pole at work. Your authority can still be high. And I teach 5 elements of authority. They're confidence, discipline, leadership, gratitude, and enjoyment. Those 5 things make you magnetic and they make you an authority figure. They make you a perceived authority figure in anybody's eyes. And I think that shows the difference between a leader and a person that's in charge. It's completely different people. So hierarchy and status do not touch or equate to anything with authority.
You would hope they would, but often they don't.
Right. So I would say there's no connection there, but I would hope that people can disconnect that in their brain
Yeah.
because there's status in one thing and hierarchy, who's on top, and then there's internal authority. I have authority here, so I have the confidence, I have the discipline. It's okay. You can be more confident than your boss. That's okay. You can still be respectful and confident because there's no status and hierarchy involved. It's just the level of confidence that we have. And the one thing I would say that most people have when it comes to confidence is they're not feeling safe. If they view it through a hierarchy lens, they're saying, I can't do this because they're on top of me, or I might face some kind of social consequences. So the tribe part of the fate model is holding them back. And just getting a few reps under your belt is like the fastest way. Like you don't need permission to feel confident and from anybody.
Or to be an expert at what you do, right?
Yeah. I still feel that. I passed the 30,000 hour mark a long time ago and I still feel that. Even walking out on stage, there's 1,000 people there, we got the little microphone and everything. And I'm like, well, why am I here? Like what if somebody calls me out?
Imposter syndrome. We
Yeah.
we could do a whole episode on imposter syndrome.
I yeah, I
it's
could
its
talk
own
for
thing.
hours about it.
So I know you've written a couple of books on these subjects. What are the books that you've already written?
The one that just came out is called the Behavior Operations Manual. and it is a gigantic textbook, like a military grade textbook on human behavior, influence, behavior profiling, and just literally everything you could ever want to know. I made it to be like a reference manual, and that kind of encompasses everything. But the last book I wrote that hit the bestseller list is called 6 Minute X-Ray, which is a rapid behavior profiling book, which gives you the ability to develop a behavior profile that's more accurate than an FBI profile in 6 minutes, talking to
Oh,
another person.
oh, I'm gonna have to get that one.
You
I'm gonna
should get
start.
it.
I'm gonna start analyzing everybody as I walk by them.
And it came out on Audible too. I've got a British guy that narrates it. He's got the buttery, smooth British voice, and I love it.
Oh, I'm definitely a fan of audiobooks, so
Me too.
particularly with an accent, that's good.
Yeah.
So the behavioral operations manual, um, is it the sort of thing that you read cover to cover, or is it really like I just want to read this section and you can learn the techniques and learn things just from reading things that
Yeah,
apply
I would
that
say
you're
it's some.
interested in?
Yeah, it's not a beach read. I would say it's so you just taking little chunks at a time and kind of read a little section, digest it, and maybe implement it into your life, and then read another section.
Awesome. If people want to find you online, where can they find you?
Just type Chase Hughes into Google, or just chasehughes.com.
Okay. We'll make sure to link to the books and your
Thank you.
websites. Super appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.